Hi, it's Dr. Parikh, wrapping up the method section with procedure. So this is where you talk almost from the participant's perspective, exactly what the participant is going to experience from start to finish of your study. This is the part that is sort of like writing up a science experiment where you're supposed to describe it as clearly as you can so that someone else could replicate it, so someone else could do exactly the same study. If you've ever been part of one of those demos where you have to write down the directions for how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then watch someone try to literally follow your directions. So, for example, when you say open the bag, but don't say to twist the twist tie and remove the twist tie from the bag, and they just have to kind of rip into the bag, those sorts of things, you want to think very clearly exactly what the participant's going to experience, starting from their first contact. And as you do this, check back to your participants section to make sure that you're exactly matching up the details. So first contact, exactly what is the person, I just realized how dark it is in my office. The sun had some clouds. Let's see. Sorry, I don't know if that even helped. So first contact, how will people find out about the study? So if you talked about advertising in a grocery store, or asking a counselor to refer relevant patients, just how will people find out and how will they tell you that they're interested? Will they send an email, make a phone call? What's the plan? This doesn't have to be rocket science, super high level details. You just need to tell me what the plan would be. Informed consent. So for ethical reasons, you'll learn more about informed consent when you take research methods or experimental psych. But basically, I want to make sure you know to include some comment that people will be told about their rights as a participant. So you can look at the samples to get a sense of what kind of wording to use. I definitely want to see the word informed consent, or the words, the phrase informed consent. And if you are using minors, so anyone under 18, even if they're 16, 17, you still need to specify that the parent will complete informed consent. And if they're over about 6 or 7 years old, you want to state that the children will provide assent, which is them saying, yes, I would like to participate in this study. And you can always Google to learn more about those terms and ideas if you want. Inclusion criteria, check back to your participants section and see what you said was required. So make sure that there's a close match. So I think the one I'm working on, the sample I'm giving you, it's required that they be within a certain age range and that they identify as male or female. So those would be the inclusion criteria. Experimental and control groups. So remember in the participants section, there was a section of like group, how you would divide groups. If you are using a demographic like men versus women, or people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness versus those who haven't, then you fill out the section in the participants and you don't need to talk about experimental and control groups here. So if you didn't fill anything out, if you're randomly assigning people to one group or another, you need to talk about that here in the procedures. So talk about how you're going to do that random assignment. So you're going to pick names out of a hat, you're going to alternate assignments, whatever you're going to do. And then if you are doing, if you're dividing people into groups, that's because you're going to treat one group differently than the other group. So you want to explain what your manipulation is going to be. Are you sending them, that'll go away in a minute. Are you sending them to get a therapy treatment? Are you letting one group play with a dog for a few hours? I would like to play with a dog for a few hours right now. So you would just explain what the treatment, what the manipulation would be. All right, just about everybody should be giving a questionnaire of some sort, at least, if nothing else, for the demographics. So just tell me how people are going to fill out the questions. If you're stopping people in a shopping mall and asking if they would like to participate in a study, then you might just have them do a paper and pencil test right there. I know at least one of the measures that I give as an option, you need to do an interview. So someone would have to come into the lab or somehow meet and be given the interview. And then you would say, well, how are they going to answer the demographics? Are you going to ask them verbally each one? Are they going to fill out a paper? Almost everybody doing this assignment can just email out the link. If they don't need to come into the lab, don't make them come into the lab. If there's no manipulation, no real reason they have to. So if it's just really straightforward questions, just say that they will be emailed, or you could mail them a packet and do paper and pencil. I would prefer that you do all one or all the other. So rather than saying like they could request blah, 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 it's better if you just have a nice consistent, because let's say people tend, it's possible that people might respond differently on the computer than they would on paper and pencil. And there's some studies that have looked into this and find that in general, online is equivalent. But I know because I had to cite one for my dissertation. But I still would feel more comfortable with a consistent approach. Either everybody gets a packet or everybody does it online. If you are working with a population that you think might not have good online skills, you would want to mail them a packet. Question order, most people do the demographics first and then do the questionnaire. Sometimes, for this, it's a little bit of a silly question because you just have your demographics and one measure. But when you have multiple measures, you have to think a little more about ordering effects. So let's say I'm asking about trauma, and I'm asking for, I'm getting a measure of your PTSD symptoms, and I also want you to tell me about what happened. Now, the order I do those things matters, because when I ask you to tell me about what happened, that's probably going to raise your symptoms a little bit, because you're, by telling the story, you're a little bit reliving what happened. And so if I have you tell me your symptoms first, let's say I ask some people their symptoms first, and other people I ask them to tell their story first, I might get different kinds of responses. And that actually could be a study. Like I could just do a study where some people do the symptoms first, some people do the symptoms second, and I compare the two groups to see which ones have higher ratings of their symptoms. So you want to just think about, sometimes you might have a reason where you want to ask the demographics last. For example, there's some evidence that stereotype threat can affect someone's performance. So for example, there's been studies that girls will perform worse on a math test if they have to identify their gender at the beginning of the test, because there are stereotypes about girls not being good at math. And I don't know how big of a difference that is, but a statistically significant difference. So just think about it, think through what you want to do, and tell me whether you would give your measure first or your demographics first. So here I wrote my measure, and then I wrote demographics. So that's the order I would do it in. Debriefing and following up. So part of research ethics is that after the study is done, you tell the person what the study was about. Sometimes you have held back some information. Occasionally, you can have deception, but that's a little more rare, and that's not going to be part of any of the studies we're doing here. But you will tell, here's what the focus was, and you always want to give some contact info if they want to know more about the study, if they want to get their results. Like sometimes if you do a personality test or something like that as part of your study, people are curious, and they have a right to their own results. And if you are giving compensation or some other kind of follow-up, talk about how that's going to happen. Like, will they get the gift card emailed to them later, or will they receive a check at the lab? Whatever you want to do. And then protection of data. Part of collecting data is protecting it, keeping it private. There are standards for how to do that, and you can lose your research funding. Like a university can lose its federal funding if the research data is not protected correctly. People take this very seriously. So here, you just need to make kind of a broad statement. I just want to see you acknowledge that you know that this is part of the research process. So if we pop over to the draft, you can see there's a heading procedures. And I typically divide it up into 2 or 3 paragraphs, and you can just see how I've written things up, and you can also look at some of the sample papers to get a sense of how to write it up. So the methods section is the biggest chunk of I think it's the hardest step for the research proposal, once you've got your research question figured out, that is. But there's still several decisions to be made, but there's not a lot of big wrong answers as long as you're following the format. I think that's what I want you to know. Let me just check Blackboard real quick to see if there's anything else I want you to know. This section is not included in the sample papers, so I've created a sample for you. I wonder what that means. I don't remember what I meant when I wrote that. I wonder if that's old, because it might be, I actually might have just copied that over from when I very first started doing the research proposal and didn't have research proposal papers to give. But either way, you've got a sample from me, and if you go into the shared folders and you look at the sample papers, I'm just going to randomly click on one. You can see there, you've got the present study, and then it goes straight into method. So here you can see how they're connected. Method starts at the very top of the page here, and that's going to be true for probably a few of your sample papers. It's not a requirement, though. It's not like the abstract or the reference page or the first page of your paper where it has to start at the top. Pages where it's like that, where it has to start at the top, one of the ways you can tell is that the heading is not bold on those pages. But you're going to see it a lot because, so you can't have headings without the first bit of the paragraph that follows. And you can't have one line of a paragraph without a second line. These are just some of the rules for how to format papers in a way that's easy to read. So with these, because you have the center heading, the level 1, then you have the level 2 heading, and then you have 2 lines of the first page. So you can see you could fit at least 2, maybe even 3 lines on this previous page, but you need to have 4 double-spaced lines to put anything. So if you see method or participants stuck here on the page without the paragraph below, just pop them down. Now what I recommend is to actually insert a page break. So let's see here. Let's pretend that happened here, so let's pretend that it's like this. Now I could just keep entering down until it goes down, but now the danger is, so you always want to make that the last thing you do, because let's say as I'm editing, I change something up here that moves some stuff down. Now I've just got weird spaces hanging. So you want to make sure it's one of the last things you do, and I recommend going to Insert, Break, Page Break. And I do that for a couple reasons. The biggest, for one, it's just easier to me. But the biggest reason is because now let's say I move some things, and it's just kind of, if I move just a little bit, it's not changing that page break. I just pointed at my screen like you could see me. It's a long day. I'm still doing it. Oh my goodness. So you can have some changes up top without changing the actual measures heading yet. But let's say we change so much that we actually do push it down. Now, if there's just a couple extra spaces, I might be scrolling through and miss it. But if there's a whole extra page inserted, I will probably notice that when I'm editing. So if I don't need it anymore, I'm just more likely to notice this way. I've talked before about strategies that I use to try to manage my forgetfulness and my spaciness. And so that is partly it's just a more robust method of adjusting the spacing, meaning that if I can change some of the spacing up above without messing with it. But it also, for me, it just creates a bigger red flag if I don't need it anymore. So it just frequently ends up that the method section is on a new page and you have a gap here, but it's not required. So if you have like a half page gap, I'm going to see what you did. I'm going to know what your mistake was, and I'm going to ding you for it. I think that's all I have for the method section, so I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.